Welcome to Travel Devil. I'm your host Clara Francken, and in a world full of mass tourism, we're here to talk about unconventional travel. Let's get into it. Vincent, welcome to Travel Devil, the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're talking about cycling around the border. You cycled around your home country, the Netherlands, and you seem to be very interested in land borders. You were actually the inspiration to start my own journey because I'm going to cycle around my home country, Belgium. To start off the conversation, Vincent, can you introduce yourself with your own words?
Yeah, well, my name is Vincent. I'm a nerd when it comes to traveling and making weird travels. I like to go on travels that not a lot of people do and explore places that are mostly unknown. I like to do that, especially on my bike, because I'm Dutch. And we Dutch, we were basically born on bicycles, and I discovered that cycling was a very neat way to explore the country, and not only my own country but other countries. So I did that about the age of 13 and still doing that.
Yeah, so you started traveling by bicycle when you were 13?
Yeah, I don't know why my parents let me do that, but I was 13 and it was before the time of Google Maps and everything, and didn't even have a cell phone or something. And my parents let me cycle 2 or 3 days to Belgium, for example.
Wow.
Yeah.
They must trust you a lot.
Yeah, they trust me a lot, I guess. I don't know if I would let my own daughter do that, but on the other hand, my daughter is 8 years old now, and we're exploring the country by bicycle together now, which is also very fun.
And so today we're talking about a thing you called grensfietsen. Grensfietsen, it's a Dutch word.
Yeah.
It stands for cycling around the border.
Yeah, well, I made the word up myself, so because it didn't exist before. So I had to make up something, and grensfietsen, well, is literally cycling around the border.
Yeah. It sounds better in Dutch than it sounds in English, because in English it would translate to border cycling, or that sounds a little less attractive than grensfietsen. Yeah. Okay. So when did your passion for land borders start?
It was there as long as I can remember it. I was raised not far from the German border. We did quite sometimes shopping in Germany, where some groceries were cheaper, which is, well, just one example where just a man-made line can make a difference between cheap spaghetti or not. It was in the time, late 80s, that the border patrols still existed, but weren't quite serious anymore. And we had to cross the border, and it was also always an exciting moment. Will they let us pass? They would always let us pass the border patrol. So that was no problem. My father had a story, well, that's because my beautiful mustache, and I was 8 years old, and I believed it. That was my first memory of crossing the border. By the years when I read more and more about it, I saw that borders meant a lot, and borders change over time. And that, from a historical perspective, is I think it's exciting. We as a mankind, we can draw lines, and we basically say, well, on this line we have to behave this way, and or the other side of the line we need to behave differently.
Yeah, and on the other hand, it's not a visible border. It's not a wall. It's not like something if you don't know that you're crossing the border, definitely in Europe, there's no control. So you can just cross the border. And if you don't know you're crossing the border, you're just walking around the same neighborhood as you were before. It's not a different view, I guess.
It differs from time to time and from place to place. The border back in the 80s was an all different concept than it is now in Europe. And it's a whole different concept between, for example, North and South Korea than it is here.
Of course, when you were younger and recall your first memory you were talking about before, also about crossing the border to Germany for groceries and stuff like that. Was it at that time still a visible border?
There was a border patrol, and they were there, all the time. But well, as I said, wasn't very strict anymore. It was not. It was also the time that Germany had a border within itself, for example.
Yeah.
And after 1992, the borders were basically lifted in the European community. So that made a whole lot of difference.
Yeah, for those who don't know, just to give an explanation about the border in Germany, of course, we're talking about the Berlin Wall, which ended in 89.
Yeah.
So it's actually a couple of years after that also the border between Germany and the Netherlands opened up.
Yeah.
Beginning of the 90s.
Yeah. The border is still there, but it's basically a bunch of signs nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, and the border seems to have funny corners everywhere. Like it's very funny sometimes when you look on the map and you see how the border looks like, but we can talk about that later. So I wanted you to take me a little bit back to the start of your journey, of your grensfietsen journey, of your cycling around the border journey. What was your state of mind at the start of this journey? What was your goal? How did you feel like?
Well, it began as an open project. I think, as a lot of people, I spent a lot of time on Google Maps. And you already saying the border has sometimes some funny corners, and I wanted to see how that was in real life. So I basically said to myself, well, perhaps I have to just go ahead and look and try it for a day and see if it's fun. I had Google Maps. That was 10 years ago. I still had a paper map as well. So I took a bunch of different maps, plotted my routes on a paper map, and just started.
And which road did you choose to start?
I had two different options in the Netherlands. The one end of the border starts in the northeast, and the other hand is in the southwest. Well, I live closer to the northeast, so it was more practical for me to hop on a train with my bike, get off, and start cycling. So I basically did that, explored the border, and after already 10 kilometers, I discovered a path which wasn't on the map, which was directly on the border. So that was a very nice present. And I had that dozens of times when I did my whole trip. I had basically two missions for myself, and that was to follow the border so exactly as possible, close as possible, and not be on the spot 2 times. So when there was a dead end road to the border, I wouldn't go along that road and then go back because, well, I hate to do the same road twice.
So if you hit a dead end, you take your bicycle and you climb the wall, or
No. I ignored that. I just wanted to make one continuous line from the north and east of the Netherlands to the south and west, which is basically one line. But that was my mission.
And do you feel like you achieved your goal?
Yeah and no. Yeah, I explored the border. I did every inch of it. I can't leave the country anymore without crossing a place where I was before. I mean, and that's very fun to realize. Along the route, I also had a ambition which was to make a blog about it, and eventually I would write a book about it. It still can happen because I really like to do it again and then collect stories of people who live around the border and to see how they cope with that in their day-to-day life. Because I met a lot of people who lived around the border and heard already interesting stories. Take, for instance, the telephone network, which was until a couple of years ago, you had to pay extra to make international calls. Well, WhatsApp, it existed, but it wasn't really widely used then. But the people there already discovered that, well, that's a nice way to stay in touch and not pay very much extra. It's also about police patrols who came by 2 times if your roads are shared within 2 countries. The Dutch police show up with their patrol, and the Belgian police. Yeah, there are so much funny and interesting stories which you can collect when you discover the border.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay. But so did you finish the whole border? Like when I was talking about achieving the goal, did you do the whole border now?
I definitely did that. Yeah, I wanted to. It took me about 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Like, can you give me a time of when it started and when you finished?
Started around 2015. I think the last stage was around 2018. Yeah. Yeah, well, I had a daughter born, for example, so my time was a lot less suddenly. So the whole project was down for a year or so.
No.
But the fun thing is, well, the border doesn't shift that much, so.
Not that quickly. And could you share a little bit of insight of what you learned from this adventure?
Well, it was a very fun way to discover not only my own country, but also the neighboring countries, Belgium and Germany. And not only the beautiful parts, but also very ugly parts. When you try to follow the borders as exactly as possible, you also cross industrial areas, highways, ugly neighborhoods. It isn't necessarily beautiful, but that's the thing I find interesting. I saw that around the borders, people tend to have very nationalistic views.
Oh.
Yeah, because they need to differ from the people on the other side, I guess. So I saw a lot of Dutch or Belgian or Flemish accents around the border. And from a political view, in the Netherlands, you see that the most right-most parties are the most popular in border areas, for example.
Okay, that's interesting. I will look into that for Belgium as well.
Yeah.
German flags a lot?
Not so quickly because, well, Germany and nationalism is complicated.
Yeah, they don't wave their flags so much, only for football. Yeah. Or if they're really extreme, then you will see a flag as well.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's an interesting takeaway, actually. I didn't know.
Yeah, and of course you can notice that the border is there in dozens of ways. The way houses are built, the way streets are painted or paved, the way woods or fields suddenly stop, or nature is present on the other sides and on the one side it isn't. The language, of course, the various shops due to tax regulations, the fireworks shops in Belgium, and coffee shops, and I mean not the shops where they sell weed, but literally coffee shops where they sell in the Netherlands coffee for the German people, where the taxes on coffee is higher. Drugstores, yeah, and so on and so on.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Do you still go to Germany for cheaper food?
Me personally not, but a lot of people still do that.
Because it's funny, because in Belgium, I think people who live close to the Netherlands, I think they go to the Netherlands for for food. And even the Dutch shop Albert Heijn, they make publicity saying it's Dutch prices but Belgian quality.
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, alcohol and fireworks is cheaper in Belgium.
It depends on what you're buying, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so you see a lot of cross-border traffic both ways.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay, and what I was also wondering, because I like the whole language concept and knowing multiple languages, and with the German border, they maybe also need to learn German, or if they want to interact with some neighbors or neighbor cities. Do you feel that more people living close to borders are also bilingual?
No, it really depends from place to place. There are places where the border is going through empty areas when basically nobody lives. There are also places where people, they don't have a different language, but they share the same dialect.
Oh,
So, example, in Limburg, people in Germany or in the Netherlands or in Belgium or in the Netherlands don't speak their own language. They speak their own dialect. And that's the way that they communicate with each other. The most interesting part, perhaps, is the most southern part of Dutch Limburg, which borders to Belgian Limburg and the province of Liège. Well, there are basically three different language areas: German, Dutch, and French. But when those people in the region communicate with each other, they use the same dialect. So no, I don't see a lot of bilingual efforts. Perhaps between the Netherlands and Germany, in some parts they do, where the dialect is not as common. But on a day-to-day basis, dialect is still used.
okay. Then I also want to talk a little bit about the practical part, because you already explained that you did this journey over 3 years. But how did you come up to split this journey into different trips?
15, yeah. 15 stages, about 100 kilometers each on average.
And it was always like a weekend trip. How did you plan this thing out?
Most of the trips I took the first train from my hometown to a neighboring train station. Sometimes when I was in the southernmost places, that wasn't realistic, so I took the train the evening before and spent a night in a hostel or something, and got on my bike the next day.
Yeah, because you didn't really know where you will arrive. Because if you're following the route so much, you cannot really know how much kilometers you do or in which city you will end to take a train back, I guess.
No, I plotted my stages quite exactly. So I had a goal. My goal was the next train station I could go home on the end of the day, have dinner, and then go back with a late train.
Okay, so you did 100 kilometers a day sometimes then as well.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds like a lot, no? Or is it just easy because the Netherlands is pretty flat?
Yeah, most of the time, except the Limburg part, which
Yeah.
is quite hilly. And that was a stage where I had an awful lot of rain as well. It was muddy, it was wet, it was going through valleys up and down at least 5 or 6 times. So that was the that was the hardest stage. On the other hand, it was so beautiful, and I had magnificent views. Yeah, one of the most interesting stories I had there was neutral Morisnet.
Okay. Yeah, could you tell me something more about that? That is a place which is non-existent anymore. It was a country.
It's a very interesting footnote in history, because neutral Morisnet was a country. Well, little history lesson. We have a tri-border point in the Netherlands between Germany in the east, Netherlands in the north, and Belgium in the south. And after Napoleon was defeated in 1815, the border between Belgium and the Kingdom of the Netherlands was drawn, and they couldn't agree where the border should be drawn. Zinc at that time was a very valuable material. They said, well, we say that's a temporary neutral area for the moment, and it was de facto an independent country. And it was a very tiny country, just a couple of hectares big, with at the highest point 15,000 people. The tri-border country was a quadruple border country at that time. And the zinc mine closed eventually, but the country still existed. They tried to make money with making their own stamps, but also very cheap liquor, casinos. It was basically a Wild West area in the late 19th and early 20th century. And after the First World War, the countries were rearranged again, and neutral Moresnet ceased to exist.
So if I understand it right, the neutral Moresnet existed between the early 19th century and the early 20th century.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was like only 100 years, maybe not even.
Yeah, 103 years to be exact.
Okay. Now it is in Belgium?
Yeah, now it's in Belgium. It's called Kelmis of La Calamine. Just an average Belgian town.
Yeah. And how was it for you to be in this place? Did you have some interesting encounters over there? Did you cross that place as well?
I came to the tri-border point. I didn't go into the former country itself at that time because I had one mission, and it was follow the borders of today. But if you look closely on Google Maps, you can still see the difference in the trees between where the border was. So you can still see on the trees where neutral Moresnet lay because the trees are different.
That's interesting. Cool. Okay. You were talking about the routes, and you were also mentioning before that you were using Google Maps and that you were preparing all of that before. How did you start by planning it out? Did you really go to Google Maps? You went one day to dot every little part?
Yeah.
Can you take me through the process?
Basically, I use Google Maps with the satellite view on one side, but also OpenStreetMap, which has more small paths still and trails. And I compared that, and I tried to make my routes, that time in Strava, and imported that as a GPX file on my sat nav. But a couple of dozen times I still explored paths which weren't on the map. And there's only one way to find out if it's a suitable path or not. And that's just by trying it. One time I almost got myself stuck in a swamp, for example. But that's the fun thing of exploring. Just try.
Okay, yeah. You also use a GPS then? Or you did put it on your phone, your map you had? Or did you draw it on your paper map?
I started with paper maps, and I stuck that with, the first 4 or 5 stages. And then I got myself a good sat nav and used that.
Yeah, so basically you imported the file, used that to follow exactly the route you plan to do.
No, it's always looking on the spot if there is an interesting path which you didn't see on the map on forehand.
But do you think it was still important for you to do the process beforehand? Because if you go with the flow anyway, then why would you make such a big mapping ahead of time?
Because it's fun. Yeah, that's the most honest answer I can give. I mean, half of the fun for me is go and explore on a map and plotting, and I see a little path here or a little trail there. I mean, that's half the fun.
That's good to know. Okay, yeah, no, but that's good. Okay, we were talking before about stories. You shared a little bit about Neutral Moresnet. There is another border part between our both countries, between Belgium and the Netherlands, which I find very interesting, which is called Baarle-Nassau. When looking on Google Maps, it looks like I don't know, like somebody starts in the Netherlands and they put a little bit of small pieces of Belgium just across the border, and it doesn't really make sense. It looks very hectical. I know you cycled through this place actually.
Yeah.
How was the experience to cycle over there? Do you have a story you would like to share about the place? And maybe can you give some historical background if you have that?
It was hallucinant. I mean, it is the most complicated border in the world. It's basically, it's in the Netherlands. It's a system of enclaves, Baarle-Nassau, which is Dutch, and Baarle-Hertog, which is Belgium. It lies in the Netherlands, but it has Belgium enclaves in it, which is Baarle-Hertog. But in Baarle-Hertog, you have Dutch, as they call it, counter enclaves. So those are enclaves in enclaves. So you have pieces of the Netherlands lying in Belgium, lying in the Netherlands. And I had to try to plot my way around that. So I basically saw, I think, every street of the village. Basically, it's a very complicated old history which goes back to the medieval days. And in the end, people there could choose if they wanted to belong to Belgium or the Netherlands. Almost every house owner made another choice. That's why the border there is so complicated.
And did you see a lot of flags over there? Like, how was nationalism in that region?
Not really that much.
Maybe today they would wish the situation to be easier. I can imagine like the border makes some practical things complicated than it should be.
Yeah, you have to cooperate there. And what you saw there during Corona time, for example, was that there was basically a shop which is lying in both Belgium and the Netherlands. And they had to close the Belgium part, but the Dutch part could stay open. In places that you have to cooperate. So you can't, with 28 enclaves, you cannot apply strict rules.
Okay, so there's 28 enclaves in total.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy we're in Europe and the borders are pretty easy to cross. Okay, so to end, maybe from your experience, you could share some tips or some suggestions for me, for my bicycle trip, because I'm going to cycle around the border of Belgium. Yeah, do you have any suggestions to me or any tips you want to share?
Take your time for stories. Take your time to meet people and hear their stories and get off your bike and look at interesting places. I think that's the most important tip that I can give you. Open yourself up for stories.
Yeah. How did you meet people then when you were traveling by bicycle around the border? Did you just talk to random people and explain why you were there, or?
When I saw a special place, or for example, a house with an old border post and flags and everything, well, I basically just stopped and, well, what can you tell me? Or an old radio station. Just enter and ask people, what's the thing you're busy with? And how do you see the border? How do you cope with it?
I guess I'm very curious from nature. I'm gonna see how it goes because I'm really curious to see how the encounters will be, and would be really nice to also talk to some people during the day in some interesting areas. Okay, what would you tell my listeners to inspire them to go travel around the borders of their own countries?
The fun parts is just exploring a line that is there, which is man-made, and see how people cope with that, but also how nature is coping with that. This was one of the most interesting projects I ever did. It was a great adventure and I didn't have to go far.
That's true. Sometimes the greatest adventures are the closest to home.
Yeah.
And also interesting because you get to know something about your own country. Okay. And do you have a challenge or a task for someone who specifically wants to do a bicycle trip around the Belgian-Netherlands border?
I would give one general challenge, and that is write as many differences between the country up that you can see. I already gave some hints, like difference in roads and houses and everything. But write it down. How many differences can you see between the Netherlands and Belgium, for example?
Yeah, that's a good one. I will also do that. Writing it down, that's easy. I will also commit to that challenge. It's a good one. Thank you so much. So we come to the end of this interview. Now I have 9 very quick fire questions that I want to ask you. You will be able to answer them with one sentence or one word. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. How old are you now?
43.
How old were you the first time you traveled to another continent?
32.
What's the longest time you've been away from home?
Half a year.
Would you rather see a lot of places or get to know one really well?
See a lot of places.
Would you rather save money on accommodation or pay for a good bed?
Pay for a good bed.
What would you teach a foreigner who wants to learn your language?
Hè?
Hè?
If you can use the Dutch word hè, which basically means nothing, then you're a very good Dutch speaker.
Perfect. Okay, so can you just explain for people who maybe don't get it what does he means?
It can mean a lot of things. It can mean, isn't it? It can mean, huh? It can mean, what? Dozens of things.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. What can't you travel without?
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Wow. And what is your favorite travel song?
It's a Dutch song in a Dutch dialect, which is called opfietsen.
Okay.
Literally means on a bicycle trip.
And by who is it?
Skik.
Skik. Okay. Now, last question. Why do you travel?
To explore.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This was Travel Devil, brought to you by me, your host, Clara Francken. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to continue the conversation or suggest any future guest, you can go to my Instagram @Clara Francken. Take care, and I will see you next Thursday.